So welcome to Online Events,
Thank
Julia
you.
Buckroyd. Yeah, so we're really excited to have you doing an interview with us before the lecture that we do tonight. So thanks for coming to Livingston.
My pleasure, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I thought we'd spend some time just chatting about your experiences, how you've arrived where you have, and the current work that you're doing, and some of the things that you're excited about for the future. So I guess one of the things I really noticed when I was reading about you, Julia, is that you started your professional life as a historian.
Yes, that's right.
And here we are in 2009, and you're a professor in counselling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what happened? What was the transition?
Well, I suppose I enjoyed history. I liked it very much. And I found my own little corner, which was 17th century Scottish church history.
Ah.
So I worked on the period 1659 to 1679, all 20 years of it.
Wow.
And wrote a couple of books and quite a lot of articles. But my interest, on reflection I can see that my interest was in the stories about the people. I was always interested in the people rather than the concepts or the economics or the battles, or I wanted to know about the people and their stories. And I spent quite a long time working on a biography of the Archbishop of St Andrews, James Sharp, who was murdered rather dramatically in 1679. So I think that it was that interest in people, that interest in stories, that attempt to make sense of somebody's story that is the common denominator. And I suppose what I moved from was thinking about stories in the past to thinking about stories in the present.
Yeah.
And of course via an interest in my own story.
Mm-hmm.
as something that I started to reflect on and make sense of in a way I hadn't before.
So you started off with the story of someone who hasn't been with us for a little while, I guess, yeah, in a very specific period of time. And you noticed that's what it was that piqued your interest. It was the individual story as opposed to the...
Yes, and
the
I was
time
interested
piece.
in the detail. I had an idea, which I never carried out, and who knows, one day I may, of writing a story about domestic life in the late 17th century in Scotland. How did people live? What was their daily life like? What was the rhythm of that life? And I think it's that same interest in, so how is it for your life? What is your life like? That is the common denominator.
Yeah, that sounds like a real therapeutic question that
Yes.
you might be asking of that period of time.
Yes.
Which sounds like a fascinating piece of work. And it's a similar question that you ask about maybe your own life and the people that you work with.
I think so, yes, yes. And so at a certain point when I felt that I'd come to the end of the piece of history what I was doing, the choice was open to me. Am I now going to learn a whole lot more history in order to teach it to somebody else? Or am I going to find something else? And I wasn't attracted by the idea of learning a whole lot more to teach to somebody else. I liked my bit, I was interested in my bit, but I wasn't sure I was interested in history for history's sake. So at that point I started to look for other things, and I thought of all sorts of things. I thought of being a journalist, again, stories about people. But I ended up as looking after a little program for an American college where students came to London for 3 months at a time, and I was responsible for organising classes for them and setting up their homestays, as they were called, their accommodation, and generally looking after them. And it was while I was doing that job that I began to feel, gosh, I think I should know a bit more about how to respond to the distress and ups and downs of young women far from home. And so then went to Birkbeck and did a qualification in student counselling, what would now be a diploma.
Right.
And that was a psychodynamic qualification. And I think I was very fortunate because for its time, I think it was an extremely good course. led by Ellen Noonan, now sadly dead. But yes, it was a good course, and I learned an enormous amount. It was a revelation, in fact.
Wow.
Like so many other counselling students, it was eye-poppingly amazing.
Yes, yeah.
And of course started me off on my own therapy and a much more detailed examination of my own history. And then I think that I was very much influenced by the first job I did, because I was very fortunate that in 1984 I got a full-time job as a student counsellor at London Contemporary Dance School, which was one of the two main principal modern dance schools in London, and at the time had a reputation for tremendous innovation and exciting dramatic and artistic work, and a very exciting place to be.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about dance,
Okay.
other than, you know, the compulsory Scottish country dancing I'd done at school,
Okay.
a bit of ballroom dancing, and because I was tall I always did the boy.
So you're always the boy when you're dancing?
I was, yes.
Okay.
So dancing wasn't really my thing, but I had spent quite a bit of time doing athletics, both at school and then at university.
Mm-hmm.
Never particularly successfully, but I really enjoyed it. And so I had that feeling that I knew what physicality and pleasure in movement and satisfaction in physical mastery and so forth. I had some ideas about those experiences, so I wasn't that far, I didn't feel, from the experience of the students. And it was a very demanding 5 years. In that time I saw about a third of the student body each year. There were about 150 students, so I was busy.
Wow, that's hard work.
It was very hard work, but I used to think it was rather like being a house officer. When you've done your medical training, you get an enormous amount of experience very fast, and you have to learn quick. And it was an absolutely irreplaceable experience. I learned an enormous amount from it.
So you're learning on the job, but at a real fast pace.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I enjoyed it tremendously. And of course, the youngsters I was seeing had been selected for their artistic and creative ability, so it was lovely to work with them as well. And of course, that thing that is always true of working with young people, they can change. They haven't spent 20 or 30 or 40 years practicing to be neurotic. You know,
Okay,
they can move, they can change. And so that was very rewarding too, to see people developing and growing.
Like you had a real opportunity to help people do what they wanted and make changes.
Yes, and that was also a main strand in it, that it felt very facilitative. They knew what they wanted to do, and to be able to enable them, to help them to do what they wanted to do, felt very, very rewarding. And of course there were some who were getting to the point where they knew they didn't want to do that. And that also was rewarding, you know, to be able to get them to the point where they could leave with some dignity and leave with some good feelings, that they didn't have to withdraw humiliated and ashamed.
Yeah. So you were helping people through a lot of transition, I guess.
Yes.
At that stage of their life and perhaps in career as well.
Yes, that's right, yes. And so at the end of that, I wrote the first book I wrote about counselling, which was Eating Your Heart Out, which incidentally I'm about to rewrite.